now that you guys have learned about all the curriculum, and we kind of did this a little backwards this year, but that was my fault because I was out of town. So. But today we're going to talk about the basic theoretical foundation and framework for everything that we are doing with Razor Coach. Second year and third year coaches, bear with me because you guys have heard this many a time, and it never hurts to hear it again and hop in at any time. Sorry. Okay. So. So how many of you guys have had career class? Majority. You guys remember talking about social cognitive career theory, Scct? Mm-hmm. Thank you for nodding, Sarah. Do you want to tell them all about it? No. Sarah was in my class, so. Basically, that is the theory and foundational framework for what we do with Razor Coach. So how we implement that, we're going to briefly go over the theory. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail about it because some of you have already had it in class, others of you will have it, but what we'll go over today will be enough for you to kind of see how we implement this in Razor Coach. And then how we implement that is today we'll talk about our intake and outtake interviews, and we've configured the intake to where it's much shorter, much smaller, more in line with the outtake. Last year, each year we've changed how we've done the intake. The first year we administered some surveys that didn't end up really gathering the information we wanted to. Last year we had some pretty intense, long intakes. I think it was taking people over an hour with one student. So some people were still doing intakes in October, so that didn't work either. And so this year we've shortened that down quite a bit to match what we do at the outtake. How long were outtakes taking you guys last year?
Oh, 15 minutes.
Not very long.
15 minutes. Okay, well this should be more, that should be more comparable to what the intake is this year. The intake might take a little bit longer because you're still building rapport and you don't want to rush through it too much, whereas in an outtake you already know your students and it probably goes quicker. But then this also ties into our different curriculum areas and then how we use this information throughout the school year. So we'll cover all of that.
On the intake and outtake too, those are in your handouts. They're also, for new coaches, they're on that jump drive, and then I'm about to send them to Kirsten to put on the drive under initial meetings and intake interviews. So, just so you know where those are.
And I'm assuming we'll talk about these after we go over the PowerPoint.
Yeah.
And I would encourage you, are we going to have people practice them on downtime with one another?
Yes, we will.
Okay, we didn't talk about that. Okay.
Are the new intakes on the drive?
I'll get them uploaded today, or
Because I thought it would.
I don't think they are right now.
And the nice thing with the intakes is the intake and the outtake, it's this handout here, they're actually in Excel format. So you pull them up on your laptop and then you can enter them in here. Does anybody not have a laptop? I still have the Razor Coach one.
Or, I guess I was going to say if you had to, you could just print them off and write the stuff in.
And then enter them in, yeah.
It would just be more complicated.
So basically the underlying idea behind, and we'll just call it Scct from here on out because it's easier, is that people help construct their own career outcomes. And so social cognitive career theory, the cognitive in there basically implies that it's our own beliefs, our own expectations, our own goals that we set, and when we play an active role in choosing our career path and the outcomes of that career path. So belief system is an important piece, and then we're going to talk about there's kind of three main underlying concepts: self-efficacy, goals, and and outcome expectations within the theory. So self-efficacy, what is self-efficacy? This is a word, if you haven't heard it thousands of times by now, if you're just starting the counseling program, this is really big in counseling. This is, what is self-efficacy?
Isn't it like the belief that you can do something in particular, like you have the ability to do something?
Yes. So it's a specific belief that you can accomplish a certain task, a certain skill, or a behavior. It's kind of your confidence in that. It's different from self-esteem. Self-esteem is more of a global, how you feel about yourself, what you think about yourself. Whereas self-efficacy, you could be really high in self-esteem. You could be really confident about who you are, different aspects about yourself. But you could have very low self-efficacy, let's say in surfboarding. But you might have high self-efficacy in skateboarding. So self-efficacy differs from each task or behavior. In counseling, you'll see there's a lot of literature and writing about self-efficacy related to counseling skills, related to your ability to work with different populations. There's multicultural competency, self-efficacy. But when we talk about, with the career theory, we talk about self-efficacy related to your confidence and your ability to be able to, what are some things that we teach in curriculum? So you might have self-efficacy related to study habits. What are some other behaviors that you think would relate to that?
Test taking.
Test taking, good.
Being able to talk to teachers.
Being able to talk to teachers, having that confidence,
Yeah, that's a big one.
That is a big
one. Reaching out.
reaching out for help, reaching out for support. Whether or not you can even get into college. Whether or not you have the ability to perform well in math or English. I mean, it's very specific to that behavior or that class or that task or action. And so one of the things that we look at, depending on a person's strength or level of self-efficacy, will determine whether they even try to initiate the behavior. So if you have talking with teachers, if you have very low self-efficacy, low confidence that you have the ability to talk to teacher, you may have anxiety around that, there may be fear about that. So you may never even really try it because your confidence is so low in that level that you don't even try that behavior. It also will impact how much effort someone will put into a task. So if I have very low belief that I can perform well in math, then I may not make the effort to perform in math because I might have the attitude of, oh well, I can't do it anyway, so why even try? And then it also, how long this effort will be sustained in the face of obstacles. So maybe I do have low belief in my math abilities, but I decide, okay, I can try this, but the minute I run into difficulties and I also have low self-efficacy in being able to ask for help, then I get to that point where I need some help, but I don't feel confident or feel comfortable in doing that, and so I give up. And then there are 4 different kind of ways that we develop self-efficacy. Probably one of the strongest ones is by doing it, by actually performing a task and learning, hey, I can do that. So think about the first time, I was going to say you rode a bike, but that may be a long time for us to remember that feeling. But think about the first time that you, any task that you were unsure about, you didn't think you could do, and then you did it, and you kind of thought, wow, you feel good about yourself. You're like, I actually was able to do that, and so that increased your self-efficacy with that task, and then that also can translate and generalize over to other tasks. You can learn, I was anxious about that. I was fearful about trying that. I tried it. I was okay. I was able to do it, so maybe this will be that way as well. Also, we learn and increase self-efficacy through vicarious learning or modeling. So that's one of the things that you all can do as coaches. How might that work as a coach? What are some things you might do to help model that?
Setting goals and showing them like the processes of them.
Okay. So learning how small goals can lead to an overall increase in a behavior. Role modeling. Role playing. So you may be a safe person that they feel like, okay, I can practice asking help from you, or I can practice, even doing, now we don't want you guys to spend a lot of your time doing tutoring or doing homework with them, but even practicing one time, like taking a page out of looking at their history textbook and actually taking a page of notes together. Taking 15 minutes to kind of find what those key points, so that's learning and modeling that you're doing, but helping them learn that as well, and then they can try it next on their own. Another key thing as a coach, persuasion and support and encouragement. And so this is a key part too, and role that you guys will play in terms of being able to, sometimes this includes finding that strength or finding that positive thing within a web of negatives. So looking at their math grade and saying, well, you know, on this quiz you made a high B. What was different about this quiz? What did you do differently? Help them find, and they might say, well, I actually studied with a friend for that one. Okay, well let's talk about how that helped you be successful if you're trying to do that again. So giving that, and then just being that person of support. I mean, we've seen for 2 years now, I think the second year data showed this, that Razor Coach kids feel like that there is somebody in the school that cares about them, that is there to help them, is there to support them, and that's you guys, that's their coach, and so that's a key part that you'll play. And then we also, self-advocacy comes from our own recognition of our own feelings and our emotions related to a task. And so I kind of talked about, you know, if we feel anxious before initiating some type of behavior, we feel anxious about taking the ACT, we feel anxious about taking a test, we're aware of that anxiety, we accomplish that task, and then we're aware that anxiety has subsided, and that helps us realize, that kind of helps us connect the next time we feel anxious or fearful about something, connect back with, well, that doesn't necessarily have to last. It doesn't have to be a lasting thing. Once I accomplish this task and if I'm able to do it, I can relieve that anxiety. It's also being aware of when we do, what does it feel like the first time you accomplish something that you think you can? How do you feel? Awesome, proud, woohoo. Endorphins might even be released. So we learn from that as well. Our body learns about that emotional reaction. Well, that felt good. That I like that feeling. I want to be able to accomplish more tasks, and so it gives additional. I'm trying to think of the word. It gives additional reason to try that again. I was looking for a better word and reason, but anyway. Okay, so one of the things that's central to some of the things that we're doing, and is also central to social cognitive career theory, we are really looking at academic self-efficacy. We also are targeting career self-efficacy, classroom behavior, studying behavior, but a lot of it can kind of come under this whole idea about academic self-efficacy, and that's the belief about one's ability to successfully perform academic-based actions. So what are some things, hint, hint, some of the things up here, but what are some of the things that you guys are doing as coaches in terms of the curriculum we're teaching, in terms of the things that we're stressing to our kids that are helping? What are some of these academic skills? We've already talked about some of them, test taking, studying. What are some other things that help you be successful in school?
Time management.
Time management.
Turning homework in.
Mm-hmm. That's a good one. We actually saw an interesting result. At the end of this, I'll talk about the results we found from our intake and outtake and comparisons, and there was an interesting result with the homework deadlines, which I think, anyway, we'll go over that here in a minute.
Active listening to, like, explaining what that is to them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I know you're gonna get to it, but I was gonna say, you know, setting goals.
Yes. And that's all part of it too. We haven't gone to the next piece, which is kind of that setting those goals or the outcome expectations or beliefs about if we perform these tasks, what will the outcome be? But a lot of that ties in well here, because when we talk about, you know, pursuing more education beyond high school, a lot of that not only depends on somebody's self-efficacy in terms of whether or not they have the abilities to do it, but also their belief, is this even worth something? Is there a reward for doing this? So, low self-efficacy, we avoid actions, we don't feel confident with the ACD, we don't feel confident looking up schools, we don't feel confident about filling out applications. All of this we have seen, and I'll show you in our intake-outtake comparisons, coaches really, really make a difference in the self-efficacy of our students. It's some of the most significant changes that we've seen in all of our outcome results in terms of what you guys do as coaches that help students to feel more comfortable, more confident in these skills and tasks. And as you feel more confident and comfortable, one, you continue in those tasks and those skills, but you also feel more confident in then trying new ones. And so that's a big piece in terms of success, is feeling confident and motivated to do that. Any questions about self-efficacy in terms of how it relates to what we're doing? Okay, so outcome expectations. This is the second key foundational thing for Scct in terms of also what we're doing. But this is our personal beliefs about the consequences or outcomes of performing a particular behavior. So how many times have you heard or even thought yourself, with algebra? Anybody here a big algebra fan? I loved algebra, but yes. But how many times do you hear, why do we have to learn this? When am I ever going to use algebra? I remember in the class I disliked the most was geometry. I did not like geometry. And I remember we always had to watch these videos about people playing billiards. Yeah, it's probably way before y'all's time, but that's basically how they taught geometry when I was in junior high. It was about how you could guess angles and how you wanted to, billiards is like a pool game, but I guess it's a little bit different. And I thought, okay, why are we learning this? When am I ever going to, so every time I play pool, I think about that. I think about, maybe if I think about the geometry of it, but no, it doesn't help me in any way. So a lot of that, when you don't have a positive belief about what the outcome of your task is going to be, you may not participate in it as much, or you may not think it matters, and so you don't put that effort into it. So we look at people's appraisal of the outcomes. What kind of reward, what kind of outcome is going to come out of this? If we believe that there won't be a positive reward, or there's no purpose in what we're doing, sometimes we won't do it. A lot of times you'll see students who kind of, with math is a perfect example, because when am I ever going to have to use this again? When am I going to ever have to? And so a lot of times what we see now more and more is how to teach math is making it have that purpose, making it have that meaning of this is how this will correspond to your life in the future. Or one of the things, what is something that you guys can do? We've talked about this as a coach to help make, and I know I'm picking on math, sorry, Sarah. I'm a math person too. But that tends to be the most one here. But why is it important to perform well in math for someone who maybe isn't going on in a math career? What can they learn from that? What are some things that we can help them?
Well, it teaches them problem solving.
Yes, problem solving.
And then if they don't feel that they're good in that certain area, it kind of turn into like a life lesson, as far as just because you're not particularly good in something doesn't mean you just give up on it. And you just kind of throw in the towel, because there's going to be aspects of our jobs and different things like that you don't particularly like or want to do, but you have to do them,
So generalizing those tasks and skills, going to class, paying attention, turning in your homework, all of those are pro-academic behaviors that are going to help you be successful not only in high school, but also in your future career and job, helping kind of generalize those tasks. So yes, you may never ever have to know a squared plus b squared equals c squared again, or what that means, but being able to go to class and participate and be successful in that class, help them see the outcome and reward of that beyond maybe just the material they're learning. We also develop outcome expectations by observing the outcomes produced by other people. So we see someone else that works hard and succeeds, And then that helps frame our own belief about what that behavior, what the consequence of that behavior can be. Observations can also affect our outcomes in a negative way. We see someone who doesn't work very hard, isn't a very good studious student, but yet somehow those students, they still manage to do well. They still manage to get those A's, or they still, the student who has straight D's and C's but scores a 36 on the ACT. I mean, those things happen, and so sometimes we have to, look at those outcomes as the observation of those as well, because someone might say, well, they didn't try very hard and they did well. So we have to kind of balance those out. Looking at attention to self-generated outcomes, our own self-approval and other approvals. So again, depending on a person's level of own self-worth, self-acceptance in others, I mean, sometimes you see students who strive to get good grades because of what their parents expect. They're trying to get the approval of their parents or their teachers. And so we want to kind of pay attention to that and look at, of course, where do we want that motivation to come from ideally? Themselves. We want it to be, not just a, what am I going to get out of this from somebody else, but we want to help build that internal motivation anytime we're working with someone to change a behavior. This is important to me. And then being sensitive to physical cues during task performance. And this kind of goes back to, this is always kind of a hard one to explain. It kind of goes back to that emotional arousal, being sensitive to how we feel in the midst of tackling a certain task. So again, that alleviation of anxiety, test taking. Very nervous about taking a test, but you study. Your outcome expectation is if I study well, I can do well on this test. Go in and you're very anxious, you're sweating, you're worried, you see the first question, oh, I know the answer. That starts to lessen a little. Second question, oh, I remember studying that. And you are aware of how that heightened sense of anxiety is lowering with each task that you complete. So what does all this mean? Individuals with positive outcome expectations are likely to have strong self-efficacy beliefs. So those two are tied in together. So if we have confidence in the idea that studying hard, working hard, having good academic skills will lead to a positive outcome, then we're likely to participate in those activities. And as we participate in those activities and succeed at them, it increases our self-efficacy. So outcome expectation is a belief about the consequence of the behavior, and then the efficacy expectation is the belief concerning our performance of that behavior. And so we might have I'm trying to think of an example of where you might have high self-efficacy in a behavior, but if you don't believe that there's a positive outcome to come of that, you still may not perform in that activity. I'm trying to think of an example. So maybe you do have a lot of confidence. Well, let's say you do have a lot of confidence in your math abilities. Just go back to this lovely math example. But you don't have a belief, or it's never been modeled to you that having skills in math is going to lead to a positive outcome. Whereas we know that's not necessarily true, but that may be your own belief, and then you may, even though you know you can perform well in it, you may not continue that performance or put a lot of motivation and time into it because the belief is, well, it doesn't matter anyway. There's nothing that will come out of this. Does that make sense? It's a bad example, but. So how might your outcome expectations impact what you see as your post-secondary options? How would that impact it?
I mean, it would make you want to apply maybe to more schools or different types of schools or.
If you have the belief that college, whether it's 4-year, 2-year technical college, if you have the belief that only privileged, rich kids go to college, how might that impact your academic behaviors in high school? If you yourself are not a white, or I guess I didn't say white privilege, but a privileged, rich student.
I mean, I know just from my own experience, from my kid, they feel like they have never been given that option, that they sort of get put in a category of kids, that that's where you are, and that's the track you're on, and you're either sort of like a dropout, or you're just gonna go straight into the workforce, or you're gonna go straight into the military, which is fine, but it's almost like they don't give them that, they feel like they've told me before that they're not given that option.
Right.
And that they didn't even know that there were ways to pay for it because nobody has really told them, and that's really hard to hear, so.
Especially if someone else's outcome expectation of you is so-and-so, I mean, we've talked a lot about that well, we haven't talked about it in here, but in other classes, that self-fulfilling prophecy that, well, no one expects me to be able to go to college, why should I? Why should I even try? Why does this even matter? To, you know, why does my GPA matter? Or, let's say with studying, if your outcome belief is no matter how hard I study, I'm not going to do well, you may fall into that idea of, so I'm not going to study. Whereas somebody who knows, okay, GPA is important, that they believe that GPA is important, and that they also have that outcome expectation that if I study, I will do well, I can increase my GPA, I can help be successful in school, then they'll participate in those activities. And that is something that you guys play a key role, not in just telling them this because they've heard it from, at least they've heard it from teachers. Some may have heard it from parents, but helping to show them how those two connect up. Helping to just show them that, you know, turning in one homework assignment makes a huge difference, actually pulling up their grade roster and looking at, okay, you had a 0 here, this made your overall grade this. You turn this in, you at least got 8 out of 10 points on it, and now look at how that one assignment bumped your grade up some. So just turning things in can make a difference. So you have to help them kind of, and that goes back to what I think, Kirsten, you said about smaller steps leading to those larger steps. The belief that it's possible to afford college, I mean, I think we've kind of talked about that one. But also, you know, many of the students you all will be working with have parents that did not attend college. They're first generation students, and many of these parents may be successful in terms of holding down jobs, having an income, raising a family. And so what the student's been modeled is that having a post-secondary education is not necessarily the only route to fulfilling what my dreams and desires are. Now, we're not necessarily saying that they have to go on to college or post-secondary, but we do know that some type of post-secondary education after high school does lead to higher income, higher life satisfaction. Doesn't necessarily mean a 4-year college, but higher ability to reach financial goals. So being able to model that or providing them with different people or different scenarios that help them see that their outcome may be different from what they've always seen. I don't feel like I'm explaining things very well, but y'all are nodding, so. And then kind of, you know, our own outcome about what the importance of a career or a job is. Being able to develop and utilize our skills is desirable. So again, whereas being attentive in class and going to class let's go back to math. Maybe the idea, maybe you're never gonna do something with math again, but the skill that you're learning by going to class, paying attention, doing what's expected of you is gonna be a skill that's gonna be very transferable and rewarded in the line of work. Showing up to work, going to work, sometimes doing things that you don't wanna have to do is gonna be a skill that's gonna be desired in your work. So if you have low outcome expectations, if your idea is, well, what does this even matter? What am I gonna gain from it? Then you're not likely to put much effort into these outcomes. Questions on that? Okay, and then personal goals. Now you guys previously went over SMART goals, correct? One of the things that we really encourage you to do each time you meet with your students is, one, to kind of review grades, look at their grades, look at how they're doing in each of their classes, point out, I mean, you may see some zeros, you may see some things that are impacting their grade in a negative or positive way. I mean, this is also a way not only to kind of track if they're falling in a class, but also to track those positive successes, because we really want to celebrate those successes. We really want to be, wow, look at this, you turned in 2 additional homework assignments you were missing, and look, it bumped your grade up to a B from, I don't know if it would do D to B, but it might, you never know, it might, depending on how much. But we also want you to work with them on setting goals, and of course we start with more small, attainable goals and help them see, too, though, how those small goals will reach to further goals down the line. So a lot of times you ask, you know, students, okay, what, in 10 years, where do you want to see yourself? Well, I want to be rich and drive a sports car. Okay, well, let's talk about what's going to take to get you that sports car. What is that? What do you need to have a sports car? Well, I need to have money. Okay, how do you get money? Well, I need to have a job. Okay, well, what kind of jobs are going to get, you know, you work backwards to where that they see, okay, so turning in this one math assignment may seem so unconnected to that goal of having that sports car, but really it's the first step in it, and kind of helping them see that link to those goals. So again, I don't know how much I need to go into goal setting. You guys did you guys go pretty extensively into SMART goals and how, I don't know why, Kirsten, did you do that?
I think Eric and I both did that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So any questions why this would, how would the first two, self-efficacy and outcome expectations, how do you think those play into goals that you set? If you believe they do at all.
Well, I mean, their self-efficacy is really gonna kind of gauge what their goals probably are, what they believe they can accomplish.
Right. And we want realistic goals. I mean, I think that's sometimes the thing, you know, you might see a C average student who sets a goal, I want to make, you know, 100% on all my assignments here on out. Well, that may, I mean, that's a good goal, but maybe talking to them about the reality of that and maybe scaling that back, because again, we also don't want to have students set such high, unattainable goals, because then what happens?
They set themselves up to fail.
They set themselves up to fail, and then that decreases self-efficacy, and then it decreases their outcome expectation of that, well, I set a goal, I tried for this, and I didn't make it. So we want to make sure, I mean, that's one of the reasons why we use that SMART. It's not an acronym, what is it?
It was an acronym.
Oh, it is, okay. Mnemonic, so that we can set realistic, meaningful goals. And one of the things that also impacts our goals and our outcome expectations, and sometimes even our confidence of self-efficacy levels, is our perceived barriers and supports. And so one of the things that we also really focus on in the Razor Coach program is, one, increasing their support. One, we as a coach are an additional support, but also helping them recognize what other supports there are. A lot of times students, and it may be surprising to us because you guys are in grad school, so obviously you've done something right in your academic career, But it might surprise you that some students are actually, and maybe in high school or other times this could define you as well, but are afraid of teachers. Don't see teachers as people of support. See, and a lot of that can come from family dynamics. I mean, a lot of times parents, if you think about it, if you're out working in the schools, it's really important to gauge sometimes, especially the younger kids, if parents have bad attitude about school, you think the kids are going to have good attitudes about school? Sometimes, because sometimes that school environment helps reshape that. But a lot of times parents experience negative experiences in school. They see school. I was surprised in my experience how many people kind of saw school as a bad place, as a, the system, the man. They're out to get you. They're out to, whereas in my experience, that was really hard for me to because in my experience, school was always this warm, safe, fun place I like to be. I saw teachers as second adults that I could go to, but that was how I was shaped in that environment, and a lot of times it's not that. So we need to help them kind of see that teachers are not out to get them, that they're not out to, they want to see them succeed and be supportive. And we also, through information, through education, and through our support, we want to remove these perceived barriers. And notice that it's perceived. Now, we have to be careful because there are sometimes barriers that we can't remove completely. But I think a good example of this is many people think, well, I just can't afford college. There's no way, no matter what, that I could ever go to college because I can't afford it. Well, now, there are many ways to be able to afford it. I'm not saying that we can get everybody a free education. We want to be important. We don't promise that. But there are definitely ways to teach students about FAFSA, financial aid, work-study programs, scholarships that can help remove that barrier. Do other people need a break? Keep going? Okay. So one of the things that we have, and this is part of the application, is each year we have had students fill out this barriers to pursue post-secondary options, so after high school. And a lot of these go back to one, what students perceive as barriers, of course, but two, also kind of tie into what their outcome expectations are as well. But this is important. We have our students, we have both the control and treatment group fill this out at the beginning and at the end of the survey. And I'll show you, I've ran some data on this from last year that I'll show you here in a minute. But I can't afford to go to college. So in the beginning we might see a lot of people say, strongly agree. What are you guys as coaches, how do you guys help with that, remove that barrier, or remove that perceived barrier?
We talk about financial aid and scholarships.
Right, you provide them the information and knowledge about financial aid and scholarships, and it's still, they may still, depending on their experiences and their ability to earn one of those scholarships or financial aid, and they may still feel that they cannot afford, but we also show them other options besides maybe an expensive four-year college, technical school, other routes. I don't think I can be successful in college. I don't have the energy to go to school. I have too much to do at work. So all of these, one, are ways for us to kind of track how these perceived barriers change over time with you all working with them. And but it also is important for you when you first start, when you're doing your intake with your students, I encourage you to pull out their barrier scale and look at some of these. The high strongly agreeers are going to be the ones where they find are strong barriers for them. Talk about those. Make sure throughout the year that you come back and look at, well, some of them aren't, some of them are reverse. Like I can devote the majority of my time to school, so if they're strongly disagree. I have no one to take care of my child. I don't know what I want to do for a career. So if you get a strongly agree on that, that's a good place to know, okay, let's start looking at what your interests are, and gives you kind of a good starting place for them. So that's the barrier scale that we have them go over. So perceived supports, we also want to increase supports that they find in the school, and also supports help create those bridges to remove barriers. And they help increase motivation for students, and they also help improve their outcome expectations. So what we've seen through some of the results of what students have said, you guys are really, really key into, it just takes one person. It just takes one person to be able to show them or point out, hey, you said you can't do this, but look at what you did here. That's a success. You brought up your grade by 10 points. Let's talk about what you did differently. Oh, you spent 15 more minutes studying. Okay, what would happen this week if you spent 30 more minutes? Let's try it. So just having that person to kind of bounce that off and see those things. And then also, once you help these students see that, hey, college or post-secondary school is actually an option for me, this is something that I could pursue, I could get financial aid help, I could get scholarships, that's going to help increase a more positive outcome expectation about these academic skills, plus it's going to serve as a motivating factor for them. Whereas before it might be, well, no one's, like Kylie said, no one's even really given me this option or showed that this could be a reality for me. Now you're showing me that yes, I could actually do this. That can help increase that motivation to be able to do it. So let's look at some of the support that we're going to help them identify. Family members, friends, teachers, faculty, coach. One of the things that we've seen, some friends/peers, it doesn't necessarily have to be their friends, their peers, but sometimes you'll have a couple of kids in your Razor Coach group that maybe are all struggling in science or struggling in a subject that you pair up, or you have a student that takes really, really good notes and another one who really struggles with that. Maybe pairing them up and helping one teach the other how to take good notes. One, that helps both of them. That helps the person that needs to learn how to take good notes, but then it also increases that other student's outcome beliefs and self-efficacy in the terms of you've recognized this is a strength you have, helping them to teach others builds their ability or builds their self-efficacy even more. Information can be seen as support. I have no idea what I want to do with my life, what I want to do for a career. Well, all of a sudden, giving them an assessment about their interest and helping them see, okay, now you can go on to internet, look up information about that career, gain that information, and all of a sudden that can increase the support in terms of the knowledge they have. Looking at them themselves as their own support. I think this is something that any high school student struggles with. This is something that you have to learn over time, but helping them kind of see, you have the strength, pointing out those successes, pointing out the skills and abilities that they have, helping them rely on themselves, and helping build that idea too that they're accomplishing these goals or these outcomes are based on what they want, based on their own desires and beliefs and goals. And then also looking at different strategies that can help support them. So test-taking strategies, studying skill strategies, different, doesn't necessarily have to be a person that provides that support, but by having certain skill sets and strengths can be support to improve their performance. Okay, so before we talk about, we're going to talk about the intake and outtake, and I'm going to show you guys, based on last year's data, how as coaches you did make a difference in the terms of these students' outcome expectations and confidence levels. So we use our intake and outtake interview, and again, this has changed each year, but I think by this third year we finally got it down. But we're using our intake interview at the beginning of the year. You'll sit down with each student and complete it in its entirety with each student. And ask them different questions. Some of them are open prompts, others we ask for you to get a rarely, sometimes, almost always, or a strongly disagree to strongly agree. And that's ways that we can quantify those questions. So if we ask someone, how often do you turn in homework by your deadline? Rarely, sometimes, almost always. I think that was the 1 to 3. And so we can put 1 as a rarely, 2 as a sometimes, and 3 as an almost always, and track that, make it an actually quantifiable thing that we can track and then compare at the end of the year to see, does that change? Did they go from rarely to almost always? It's also a way to gather qualitative data. So asking about, well, what kind of steps have you taken so far to pursue a career? Well, some students may give you, well, I've talked about this with my counselor, I've talked about this with my parents, I've actually gone to visit NTI, I've taken all these steps. So you know, okay, well, we don't necessarily have to go back to the beginning. They've already taken some of these steps, whereas another student may say, well, I haven't really done anything. I don't know what I want to do. I haven't a clue. I've never really given it any thought. And so that's a way for you to gather that data about where you might need to start with that student. And then it also helps, just as we do an intake interview with any client that we work with or student to some extent that we work with, it helps start building that relationship, starts helping gather information about that student. And we're going to have you guys practice this with one another, doing the intake. Probably pair up old and new coaches so that the older, or returning coaches, sorry, not older, can give feedback and tips on the intake. Other than the intake last year being so long to complete, returning coaches, what would you say were some of the positive things about being able to sit down and, especially Carolyn, for you, who was here even the first year when we just did this survey that did not work at all. What are some of the ways that helps build a relationship with your students?
It just really gives you such a good base for knowing who your students are, so you can really hit the ground running and know where they stand and what they're thinking and what they want to do, instead of, taking several meetings or just trying to start out like, okay, this is what we're going to do starting now. It kind of allows you to move with them and where they are. And we just get so much information in this one interview, which is really nice.
And if you'll notice, on the intake itself, you'll see that some of them have, like, number 5 has an FCC. I meant to get them the code.
We can maybe send that out, or,
Okay.
yeah.
So the question is, if you had to choose today, what do you plan on doing after you graduate from high school? Well, that FCC stands for Future College and Career. Sometimes I even forget what they are. But, so that question is geared for us to assess information about where they stand currently in terms of their future college and career goals, so that we know when we go back to, let me skip forward here for a second. When we're getting ready to address career exploration or college exploration in our curriculum and our timeline with those students, we can actually go back to the intake, look at those questions related to future college career, because it will give us a reminder of where that student is starting from, that starting point of, have they given any thought to it? Do they have a plan for next year? What types of activities have they done in terms of career and college exploration? AAT, academic achievement testing. Look at that before we start talking about ACT and doing test prep. So one of those questions, let me find it.
12.
How confident do you feel about taking tests? Does it depend on the subject? So when we start going to that, you may have a student who feels very confident, has always done well on tests, so you may not need to spend a lot of time starting talking about test anxiety or how to prepare for tests. But you may have a student that answered that question that's terrified. Doesn't matter what subject, if I know it's a test, I don't perform well, I get all nervous, and so you know that you need to start at that beginning level of talking about maybe doing some coping skills, teach you some coping skills, teach you some relaxation techniques, teaching them how to self-talk, take deep breaths, regulate their behavior. And so all of this, we don't just do it in terms of gathering information at the beginning and then comparing it at the end. I mean, all of this is information that you can go back to as a starting point each time you start with a different curriculum unit with your students.
Also, just to clarify, the intake and outtake interview are just to be done with all of the new students in the
Yes.
new cohort. So with booster students, they've already done these. So new coaches, you guys should have, we haven't, I think Heather put this on your jump drives last week, that you should have the intake outtake interviews for the booster students of last year. So look at those before you start working with your booster students to kind of gauge out, how they've progressed over the year. But just to clarify, this is just for new students. And it's supposed to be an interview format. Don't just, print this off and hand it over to the students and have them fill it out. It's for you guys to,
I forgot to mention.
to work with them through the conversation piece.
The little video that we did last year?
Yes.
I guess it's a lot different now.
It is different, but
It's gonna
that
be
could,
longer, but
that could at
maybe
least
just to review.
give them an idea
Is
of
that
kind of
on the track? Could we give them
I think it's-
directions behind that?
I don't know that it's uploaded on the drive, but we could upload it to our YouTube channel
Because
probably.
it is really important that you actually use this as a tool, because I think some people last year didn't even really use it as a conversation or an interview. They just kind of printed it off and gave it to their kids to
Mhm.
fill out or do whatever, and that's not what this is for. Like, this is for us to get to know our kids and actually do our job. So it's like, it is really important
Yes.
that we, do it seriously and fully.
And if it takes you 1 or 2 sessions, depending on how your school is outlined in terms of how long you can pull a kid, but don't rush through this. I'd much rather it take you 2 or 3 sessions, because you may get to a question, what classes do you like? What do you do well in? What makes you like them? You can gather a lot of information from your student in terms of just what they're talking about with that. Now, a lot of times what you'll find, what did you guys find last year? We thought, some students will just talk on and on about things, but, I like English. That's it. They might be very short. So you might have to use some prompts and, again, this is a time for you to use your counseling techniques and skills, basic listening skills for those of you who are getting ready to take techniques. It's always interesting to see as we go through, because you're all's Carolyn, I think, are you, and Ashley. The first year you guys were in Razor Coach, you were also in techniques, and it was kind of throughout the semester. Each time we would learn a new skill, it was kind of like, this is going to help me with Razor Coach. So for those of you who are just starting out, don't feel like you don't necessarily have the skills or abilities to do this, but as you go through techniques and kind of learn the different skills about responding and attending and prompting, I think you'll find your meetings with your students will get more and more comfortable in terms of nothing magical. Nothing that you're necessarily, it's not like a whole new magical way thinking, but it is, I think a lot of times after you take techniques, you realize, wow, I thought I was a really good listener, but didn't quite realize that there are some key aspects to it. I don't know, returning coaches or those of you who've had techniques, any kind of piece of advice you would give or any kind of pointers?
I would just say, I know this is much shorter, but just remembering that this is asking a lot of questions, probably the first time you're gonna meet your students, so just kind of being aware of that and patient when they do give you a one-word answer. Just kind of putting yourself in their shoes, and thinking about that could be intimidating to answer so many questions about yourself.
And I would give a little, when are we doing informed consent?
That should be done. Initial. You mean us here?
Yes.
Talk about.
We haven't talked about
Oh.
that yet.
We can do that
Maybe we
anytime.
need to do that tomorrow afternoon
Mhm.
before we do scenarios.
I totally agree.
We'll go over what you need to say with your students in terms of your informed consent about working with you as a coach and kind of what that means. And that could even be some scenarios we could talk about tomorrow, Josh, if we want to put that together.
I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but the intake doesn't have to be the first meeting either. I mean, you know, you may
Sure.
want to just have kind of an icebreaker, kind of get to know you, relax, and then go in with
Yeah.
decent questions.
And a lot of times, I don't know if you guys have talked about it yet, but about, some people have had their students make collages or do some kind of activity where when they first met, they met maybe as a big group, and they said, okay, next time we meet, I want you to, and you could do anything. You could have them bring in the lyrics to their favorite song and talk to you about why they like that song. That might be a little bit more intrusive for some, but for some, they would love it. And you could give them different options, so they could put together, this is me collage. I'm trying to think of what are some of the other ideas. Returning coaches, what are some of the things that you guys did?
That's what I did something like that, but only, there weren't that many that actually did it. It was like
Yeah.
for extra points or something.
Yeah.
So it's like-
Yeah.
Extra incentive.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I think, when you start the intake too, I think it's important to share with them that this initial information you're gathering is probably gonna be the only time that you sit there and are really grilling them with question after question. And I would kind of stress with them that, these sessions are about, their sessions with you are about them and what kind of areas that they want to focus on, but this is a way for you to gather information in the beginning to know where a good starting point is. And I would kind of let them know that it's not going to be session after session with you sitting there writing down things and asking them questions. I would use your, tell me more about that. Or, especially if you see, if they're kind of giving you one-word answers and not very open about, but all of a sudden you get to, what are some of your hobbies? And they really start, oh, I love to whatever, spend that time using that to build some rapport. Well, tell me about that. What got you into that? Why? It doesn't have to be a strict, you can't veer from, that uses this as a time to relationship build as well. And I think that's where, when we talk about the skills that you learn in techniques, that's some of the things that those who have had techniques are going into it with maybe an advantage in terms of how to pull maybe more information from the student. But other thoughts?
What I did is that I gave my students an all about me sheet when I pulled them in the first time to let them know, congratulations, you're in the program. And so that was done as a group, but I had questions on there asking, so it had a house, and fill in who you live with or what your hobbies are. And then if you notice on the intake, those are really the first questions on there.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time we did do the intake, I already had that information, and it's easier to say, oh, so I saw that you have an older brother,
Yeah.
what does he do? Or you really like basketball, tell me more about that. And they really liked it, and they're like, oh, you remembered.
Yes.
So that was really helpful too.
That is a great idea, yeah. Do you have that all about me sheet? You might share that.
She's gonna update it and I'll put it on.
I
Yes.
sent it to Josh.
But no, that's a great idea. And then, just think about how you would feel going in. One, you're getting ready to go in with a stranger. You don't know, you're not really sure what this program is about. But then, kind of what Erica shared, it personalizes it, and it does show that you have an interest in them. And, even though you're just reading it off their sheet, but a lot of times just that, oh, you remember I like basketball, yeah. And starting off by talking about something that's meaningful to them and that you care about it. And of course, be genuine and be yourself with it. Don't pretend to love something that you absolutely hate, but you can always gather more information from them.
So the informed consent part that we'll talk about tomorrow, because my thought was just, what do we tell them in terms of privacy? Because if somebody has anxiety talking to teachers and then we're asking them, do you do your homework, yes or no? I could see someone not wanting to, be honest
Yes.
about that.
Yeah, and we'll talk about we'll go over, I think we've got a handout that kind of goes over the different things that you want to make sure you cover with them, privacy, confidentiality, what kind of the limits are to that, what are your limits as a coach, with them. And then I think, just even acknowledging it, sometimes just kind of like I was talking about sharing with, today is gonna look a little bit different than any other day, because I'm gonna be sitting here asking you a lot of questions, and, probably, if anything feels too personal, you don't have to answer it, but this is not a way for me to judge whether you're doing things right or wrong. I just wanna learn more about you and find out where we're starting from, so I can help you build better academic skills, or help you kind of reach the goals that you want to. I mean, I think sometimes just throwing it out there that you recognize that it's intrusive, and even kind of, this is just for us to talk about and to stay with me in terms of, then I might even make a joke about it, use humor too, say, so if you tell me you don't study, I'm not gonna run and tell your teacher you're not studying, but it helps me know where we're starting.
Yeah.
Just a simple kind of thing like that to alleviate that fear that this is somehow gonna, that they can be honest with you. But that's a good question, and I think going over kind of that informed consent helps with that, so. I've kind of jumped here. Okay, so before we go over, we'll take a quick break here, and then I want to kind of share with you guys some of the results that we did come up with in terms of looking at, over time, how your work as coaches with the students did impact their confidence levels and their outcome expectations on some things. Anything else? Josh is going to put send you out the example of last year's intake interview, which I think that was about a 45-minute. Carolyn, do you remember?
It's probably 50 minutes.
So it will be shorter this year, and again, you can break it up into 1, 2. Are we going to set a deadline for when we want intakes to be completed?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I mean, I guess I was looking at October 10th, and that would give everybody about a month, so we can shoot for that. And if you start, I know with some people, the way your schedule may be set up, it may depend on that, how quickly you can get these done. But we'll go with October 10th as a deadline, and if you have any, if you start to run into problems with them taking longer or something like that, let us know. And then you also notice when you pull up the Excel sheets on these, that there's a tab with the same intake interview on each worksheet. So when you do these, don't do them on separate Excel sheets, just enter each student on a different worksheet on that same one Excel spreadsheet. So when you turn them in, every student's on that one file. Does that make sense? Thanks. Yeah, because I think some people did that last year, and some people sent in the separate ones. So this time, just do it all on that one big Excel spreadsheet. Basically, by putting all these reports that you guys are going to be doing on Excel at the end of the year, we'll basically have one Excel file for each school that has planning reports, intake, outtake interviews, end of year reports, all that kind of information on one big Excel file for each school, so we can start kind of building a database on those things. Yeah,
So first student would go here, and then they press 2.
Yeah.
And then 3.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
And if you want, I guess
Didn't
it.
you want, we had their app ID has the number on the tabs. Or at least
Yes.
I guess that doesn't really matter, because we put their app ID like up there,
Here.
Yeah, it wouldn't hurt to go ahead, and rename each worksheet as the student's application ID,
anyway, we'll go over that.
as well as listed at the top there too.
Was it red?
And then we'll also be sending out, as far as application IDs, we have, certain numbers for each school, and I'll be sending that out the next day or so too. So you'll get more of an idea of what application numbers are for your school.
So ideally, or I guess what we're asking you to do, I shouldn't say ideally, after you watch the example, pair up with a returning coach and practice the intake with them, and then they can give you some pointers. We have fewer returning, don't we, than, but before you, we've got probably, what, a month before you actually sit down in front of a student? No, because next week's first week of school, so 3 weeks.
Well, I mean, it's about a month, yeah,
Cause we'll have.
after recruitment.
in 2 weeks.
But you'll be, well, you won't be doing this with the booster students, but you'll be meeting with students, I guess.
And returning coaches, try to emulate your students as well as you can in terms of, and I think that's one thing, in the interview that you guys will watch, I think we have a more talkative, isn't that the one where we have a more talkative student that gives more information, Carolyn, than maybe we
Yeah.
would with an
Yeah.
actual
I
student?
think Heather was the student, so she was probably a really good student.
She was?
She was probably a really
Yeah, I
good.
think it was
talkative
Taylor.
student.
Wasn't it Taylor?
Or was it Taylor?
Yeah, but I think she was much more talkative than the
Yeah.
average high school
Yeah.
student would be. So when you guys pair up with the new coaches to practice, I'd encourage you to be more typical
I
of
found
what
that
you
on my
guys
meeting.
experienced last year in terms of, I don't know.
Change it
I
up.
think it looks good.
But you can send it out.
I'll send it, but if y'all wanna change it.
It was funny, in the end of all, it says like, is there anything else, does it say, is there anything else I need to know about you that you think is important in this one at all? Cause that's where they all told me, if they had ADD, if they had dyslexia, and that's where they all just told me like, oh, well, you should probably know about this, like, for me or whatever. And that was really interesting, so I encourage you to know, just because there's a lot of resources at the school they don't know about a lot of times for ADD or dyslexia or
Yes.
whatever it is. And it's just good for you to know, because that's how I structured with specific students. We tell them more, you just do things differently.
Yeah, I don't think that's on this year's, so that may be something just to kinda add at the end.
Yeah, to think about at the end, anything else you'd like me to know about you. And that's a great relationship building question in and of itself, too. So, are you guys okay if we go over these results really quick, or do you need a bathroom break?
Go for it.
Do it.
Well, that you can barely see, okay, but basically what this table is this is any of the questions that were in. Now, some of these have changed slightly because our intake is, but I think most of these variables we're still looking at again this year. But basically, what I did is took any of the quantifiable questions where you gave a response that we were able to code 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3, so those rarely, sometimes, almost always, or the strongly disagree, strongly agree. We took out any kind of the neutral, undecided, so that we could have firm, what am I thinking? Firm kind of answers to it. And you'll see, so basically I took the question and I made up really horrible variable names that make sense to me, but they're pretty, I mean, work hard. So do you believe that working hard will give you, or help you to be successful? And so basically looked at the intake mean, the outtake mean, and then performed a basic t-test on them, which if you have had stats, or if you will have stats, but basic t-test is just comparing two different means, and in this instance, we're only looking at, was there significant difference between the pre-test mean to the post-test mean? And then ideally, we want a p-value of less than 0.05 for it to be a significant difference. But there's also, when you run this many t-tests on one set of data, you have to do a correction, and so you really want your p-value to be lower than a 0.05, because the more tests you run with the same group of data, the more likely it is you could cause an error. So the cool thing is some of these that we found were significant, not only were significant at that p less than 0.05, but they were 0.0001, which even with the adjusted alpha value is still really significant. So I'll briefly share with you what the significant changes that we found. And you can kind of, as you go through, is this readable on your, it's probably not even
I think,
readable.
It's
We
on
have
here.
a bigger
Yeah, the
one
very
printed
last
out, a full page.
thing is a handout.
Oh, okay, so you could even, I mean, if you're fascinated with this, which I'm sure everybody is, because everybody loves stats and everybody loves looking at things, but it is interesting, and kind of exciting to look through. You can pretty much, I think, the way I named the variables, I think you'll be able to figure out what question it goes with, and then you can kind of look at how the changes and differences were within them. But some of the things that were exciting to see that were significant changes, so in the beginning, we asked her, do you believe that others can be helpful to you? Strongly agree to strongly disagree. And actually, it should be strongly disagree to strongly agree. Strongly disagree was one. It looks like, no, nobody believed that. But even though there was only a 3.5 to a 3.7 increase in terms of whether they agreed with that statement or not, that was significant at the 0.02 level. So basically, their outcome expectations, their beliefs about others being helpful to them changed. Interestingly, do you turn homework in by deadlines? There was not a huge drop, but it was a significant drop from students saying that being possibly more honest, or this could also show that they're more aware of whether or not they're turning their homework in by deadline. So of course we don't really want to see it drop, but at the same time, there could be that they're realistically or more aware of whether or not they're turning in.
I think that goes with Jen's thing about, in the beginning, they want to like look at, like, oh yes, I do,
Yes.
that very first. And so I really think that has to be part of it.
Mhm. And that's one of the things, the survey that we used the first year was all about, okay, it was kind of a self-efficacy measure and outcome expectation measure, but everybody pretty much agreed with everything. And so we had people that really rated themselves higher, and what we found at the post-test is that people were dropping in self-efficacy or in, not so much an outcome, but a lot of their confidence levels, but a lot of that, so it looked like we did the opposite of what we wanted to do, but what we may have done, and what I would like to believe we did, is we helped students become more aware of their skills and strengths. And so someone who, at the very beginning of the year, said, oh, I can, always make good grades, strongly agree, because then they realized, no, it takes some time and effort, and so they became more realistic and aware of what their skills and strengths were. But it was not a good measure because it didn't really show what we were doing. And I think this shows better some of the things that we're targeting with the students. And hopefully this next year, seeing some significant changes within our own measures, I'm hoping will also relate to what Sarah's going to share with us tomorrow in terms of, is she going over a lot of the academic outcomes?
No,
We don't have those yet.
we don't really have much of those yet, but she'll talk about them some.
Okay.
They may have ran some subset stuff by then.
This is one that I think is really cool. How comfortable, confident do you feel in reaching out to other people? So there was a 0.0, very significant in terms of the p-value that we're looking for in terms of how they feel about reaching out to other people. And I think this is something that definitely relates back to you guys as coaches, because that's something that you work with them on. They've reached out to you for support and help, but you've modeled what that's like for them. Do you feel confident in asking questions if you do not get something? And so again, a significant increase there. Y'all let me know if you want to talk about any of them or questions. How confident do you feel about taking tests? And so that's another one where the specific curriculum and skills we've taught made a significant impact on the overall group's confidence in taking tests. How comfortable do you feel with looking up information on possible careers for yourself? And how confident do you feel in being able to have money to attend college? And this was a 3.3 mean to 3.8, so that was a bigger jump than some of the others were. So you can see that a lot of these, in terms of self-efficacy and confidence and abilities, that you guys as coaches did make a difference in terms of the work that you were doing with them. And what do we know about increased self-efficacy and increased self-confidence? What does that impact? Why is that even important?
Impacts your goals.
It impacts what goals they set, it impacts their own, their own expectations of what they can do. I mean, all of a sudden, I feel confident that I can be able to have the money to attend college. Well, now all of a sudden, all sorts of doors are open to me because I'm not just believing that a barrier of no money keeps me from these other options. So I'm going to explore that. I'm going to look into that. How comfortable do you feel with looking at possible colleges to attend? How confident do you feel about getting into college? So that's a significant one because, again, if we've increased their confidence in their ability to go, they're going to do more tasks and behaviors to try to get into college. How comfortable are you with making plans for the next year? And then do you think that setting smaller goals helps you achieve larger goals? Questions, comments on any of those?
Are these just your active students, not booster students?
Yes, these were just our active.
So that,
Now,
these will be, well, there'll be booster students this year.
That are asked these questions, or these
Yeah.
students will be booster students?
Will be booster students,
Oh,
they were,
okay.
they were new students last year. Yeah.
it's a good point. It'd be interesting to have them do the outtake again, the boosters. See, did that sustain?
Wonder if we-
And then I was hoping, can you see that? Yeah. With the barriers data, unfortunately, the first year, the barriers data got messed up because some of them, on the second administration of the barriers data, some of them got flipped where it was 1 to 5, where others were 5 to 1 on the responses. And then when they got entered into the Excel spreadsheet, it got to be a mess. And so I wasn't able really to analyze those because we don't know which ones are which. And so it may be that somebody really scored high on a barrier, but because the numbers were reversed, it was actually low. So does that make sense? We don't really know. So for the second year barriers data, I was hoping that we would see a bigger difference in the two groups, because with the neat thing with the barriers now, all of the intake, outtake data we have is just based on our Razor Coach kids. So we really, we can see that these students had increases in their confidence and made significant changes on these, but we can't necessarily come to the conclusion that it was specifically because of Razor Coach, because we didn't compare them to these non-Razor Coach students to see, well, they may have had that many changes in their confidence abilities. I mean, I like to believe, and I think it implies that Razor Coach does make a difference, but one of the reasons why our funders wanted us to have a strict control group and students that don't participate, because you can make stronger conclusions about whether or not it was our intervention that made the difference or not. So with the barriers data, this would be a way that we are able to compare treatment and control, and I was hoping for a huge difference here between Razor Coach and control, and we didn't get it. But we did get some significant differences here. So the first time, first looking at the pre-test and post-test comparisons by group. So what that means is I looked at the treatment group, Razor Coach kids versus the control group. So on the pre-test, you can see that the Razor Coach kiddos had a score of, the higher the score, the more perceived barriers there are. So they had a score of 38.25. The control group had a score of 36.2. So it doesn't seem like there's that much difference between the two, but running a statistical analysis on it showed that it was a significant difference, so that Razor Coach kids, even going into Razor Coach, had a significantly higher amount of perceived barriers than the other group. Ideally, you'd wanna see those be equal, because it does show that there was a difference even going in. But by post-test, which is where I do think we see some support for the Razor coach, you see that they are equal, that this difference is not a significant difference. So both were, the treatment group went from a 38 down to a 21, so that's a pretty big drop in terms of perceived barriers. But the control group also went down by just as many, roughly, yeah, actually, almost identical. So when you look at up here, just looking at overall, both groups had significant differences between, they both had significant drops in perceived barriers between pre-test and post-test. What we would have liked to see, even though I don't want anyone, I mean, I wouldn't want to see the control group continue to have barriers. I mean, I'm glad that theirs dropped as well, but we would have liked for them to stay the same and we to make this huge drop to be able to say, but there are other interventions going on in the school that could be impacting how they answer. And overall as a group, you see combined, every single kid who filled this out dropped significantly in their perceived barriers. So whatever interventions are going on are helping students just with more information and knowledge. What would be interesting is to go back through, and I kind of want to do an item, looking at different items and see if there were any items. So like financial aid, I believe, I don't have the money to attend school. It'd be interesting to just compare that item between and see if there were any significant difference between the two on items. And so I may try to do that as well. But it is, I mean, if you get excited by this kind of stuff, which I kind of do, but I mean, it is exciting to see that barriers did drop over the year, so perceived barriers. So, questions, thoughts? That's all I have. I should did that in under 2 hours.
I
Imagine
know.
it would happen.
Oh, no.